welcome back to another episode of Inside the Vault, episode number 40, a Carolina Panthers podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Smith. My latest guest today here on Inside the Vault for this 40th episode, he is a writer previously for Bleacher Report, then Milwaukee Journal Sentinel as well. Currently now NFL feature editor, owner, founder of GoLongTD.com. I'll let him tell you more about that, but it's essentially a long story forum kind of column website. I'll let him tell you more about that. But follow him on Twitter at Ty Dunne. Tyler Dunne, welcome to Inside the Vault, my man. How's it going?
Good to be here, Ryan. It's like anytime I do anything with anybody from Charlotte, North Carolina, my mind immediately races back to how I fell in love with sports, and that is Alonzo Mourning, Larry Johnson, Muggsy Bogues, the trade for Glenn Rice, which had me in tears in second grade. I'm not going to lie.
Yep.
Zoe was my first jersey. And then Glenn Rice became my favorite player of all time. So, yes, those Hornet teams were a hell of a lot of fun. If you just want to talk about the Hornets for an hour, I'd be cool with that too.
I mean, we can get into some Hornet stuff if you want. I mean, so
they stink, but
let's start like what made Alonzo your guy growing up in some of those Hornet teams. You got Muggsy Bogues and like you said, Larry Johnson, and we drafted Kobe technically, but well, that whole thing.
You know what's funny is I remember exactly where I was when that draft happened. It was like a youth track event. Like I must have been like in fifth grade by that point. But I remember being thrilled that they traded this high schooler, this unproven high school kid for Vlade Divac. Are you kidding me? We got Vlade, put him with Glenn Rice, with Anthony Mason at that point.
Yeah.
Oh man, we were gonna do some damage. Anthony Goldwire off the bench. Let's just talk about obscure Hornets. Let's go Hersey Hawkins, Kendall Gill, Raphael Addison. You know, that was a fun time. You know what it was though? It was just the teal jerseys. I mean, were amazing. The starter jacket, all that stuff. It was like mesmerizing as a kid, like just falling in love with sports.
And the Charlotte Coliseum where they played, I've been there a few times.
Oh, that court was amazing.
That Hive was amazing. It was so tight in there. It was so wound. Small venue that it was just so hard to play. And then, I remember the David Wesley years, the Jamal Mashburn years, PJ Brown, a few.
Yeah.
I met Baron Davis when I was a kid, so that was kind of like my claim to fame there. So anyway, yeah. So a lot of good Hornets memories, and then we'll see if LaMelo Ball, Mark Williams, and Brandon Miller can kind of pick up a slack here for the Hornets as they get another top 5 draft pick now coming up in the draft, and then seeing what happens from there.
So close to Victor Wembanyama. I mean, I got to tell you,
we said the same thing with Anthony Davis, and we got Michael Kidd-Gilchrist as well. So. Yeah,
he's still working on that jump shot. It's okay. Still working on that jump shot. It'll come around.
Exactly. Well, let's get into this Inside the Vault Panthers podcast. Good to relive some Hornets memories there, just to kind of off the cuff. But your thoughts on the Panthers offseason draft, free agency, kind of as a whole, and then I'll get into more specific stuff as we go. But just kind of your overall 4,000-foot view of those things.
It strikes me as we could talk about ownership for hours and hours and hours, right? I mean, the David Tepper stories are ridiculous and embarrassing and brings so much bad publicity to this team. And I'm not taking away from any of that. All I'll say is, though, if Dan Morgan is in charge, the general manager, you have a smart football mind making football decisions. If he is empowered, truly, and you hope he is, you never really know with some of these owners. I think that's a good sign, right? Like, obviously, CJ Stroud took the league by storm as a rookie. Bryce Young did not. And all of the concerns that scouts had on Bryce Young looked legitimate. His size could be an issue. You know, how slippery he was, just kind of weaving in and out of traffic. In the SEC, he wasn't able to do it in the pros. But I do think there was so much working against him from the lack of weaponry, obviously. I mean, you've got some D- to C- receivers, the line being banged up and not that good to begin with, no running game, and the offense schematically it was lame. I mean, it was elementary. It was call the play, run the play. If it works, great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Not exactly what Bobby Sloak's doing with the Houston Texans, right? Where there's built-in answers for whatever the defense is trying to do. Like however that secondary is lined up, you've got answers built into that. So I think it was necessary for them to fire Frank Reich and move on from that staff, which was heralded as an all-star staff, right? Like we all thought this was this amazing staff when they were all
Yeah.
brought in, Josh McCown, everybody. But it wasn't. I feel like Bryce Young didn't really have a true shot to succeed as a rookie, and now he's going to have a shot, right? And
Yeah.
we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves with the Bryce Young discussion, but I think it does start there with Dan Morgan. You've got a smart person making decisions, and a lot of teams don't have that.
Well, go into Dave Canales. You just talked about Dan Morgan, obviously taking over for Scott Fitterer with the new GM job. Talk about Dave Canales, 42 years old, former offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, quarterback coach in Seattle. So he's worked with Geno, he's worked with Russell, he's worked with Baker. What have you seen from Dave so far this offseason? What do you know about him just from your reporting and things that you've done asides? And what do you think of his chances of being I don't want to say the next, Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan. We won't go that far, but someone who can have a stable offense for a team like the Panthers, who have not been relevant in some time, and just provide some stability to this team.
I love the hire. I know it was criticized heavily because it seemed on the outside that the naive take is it's a mediocre rise. Like, oh my gosh, one season with Tampa as an OC with Baker Mayfield and you're a head coach.
Right.
But he's impressive. I mean, you talk to him. I want to say we've only talked once, but it was for a long time, like 40, 50 minutes ahead of this Tampa Bay season for a Bucks story. And there was a lot of hope with that Bucks team. The players on both sides of the ball really did believe that they were going to shock the world. They were written off as maybe the worst team in the NFL, and they made it to the divisional round. They're a couple plays away from getting to the NFC Championship game, and a big reason, maybe the biggest reason, is what Dave Canales was able to do with Baker Mayfield. He resurrected his career. The way he thinks through offensive football is impressive in the sense I think he's brilliant, and schematically he'll do all the kind of stuff that we're talking about here with built-in answers, pre-snap, post-snap for the quarterback and all the weapons. But I think he can take all of that complicated stuff and distill it down to digestible terms for players. And he used an analogy I'll never forget with Tampa Bay's offense and trying to set up those big plays. And it's almost one of those analogies that it's going to make the analytics community roll their eyes and think, oh, what the hell is this guy talking about? Right? You can't talk about it. But needing to run the ball and needing to dink and duck to an extent and not taking shots and shots and shots and shots, not just chucking the ball downfield willy-nilly, because he's like, think of yourself as a boxer in the ring. If you're just throwing haymakers all the time, the strength of that haymaker is really watered down. Like, you need to pick and choose your opportunities deep. And I think that they really found that balance with Tampa Bay. It took a while, it took a couple months for them to really hit their stride, but they hit their stride and they turned that thing around. So he'll know how to get the most out of Bryce Young. Baker Mayfield isn't that big of a guy, but I think that him and Dan Morgan are really in sync too, because with these smaller quarterbacks, shorter quarterbacks too, it's not necessarily paying up for the offensive tackles. We think about offensive line in those terms all the time, right? Like, you got to pay this incredible money and expend this incredible draft capital for the left tackle, but you need the guards. Like, look at Drew Brees and those Saints teams. Like, they had Carl Nix and Jari Evans for all those years. And I think when they left, they had more really talented guards. They really invested in the interior of the line. So a smaller quarterback in Drew Brees had depth of pocket to then step up into that pocket and see what the hell he's looking at. I don't know much about Robert Hunt. I was not grinding the all 22 of the Miami Dolphins, but
Well,
I trust the GM's intellect.
yeah.
And I know it was not cheap. He cost a lot of money. But if that's where your attention is as a franchise in trying to get the most out of Bryce Young, that's a good place to start, I think.
Yeah. Well, you did mention the O-line specifically. And listen, as a Panthers podcast person, I'm not going to just sit here and say, like, Panthers had the best offensive line or the worst or even the worst. I think it was better than people thought. Now, was it among the top 10? Obviously not. But, you just going back to the 2020 2 and 3 seasons, respectively, both our left and right guards, were out after like 4 games combined.
Right.
So, like, right there, like, Brady Christensen and I believe Austin Corbett were our two starting guards, and they're not bad guards. They are good guards. I mean, they're not Zach Martin from the Cowboys, but they're good. They're decent guards, and so I think, but you lose them, and then all of a sudden it looks like, oh, the Panthers' offensive line sucks. So it's like, that has to be taken into consideration a little bit. Taylor Moton is a really good right tackle. Icky had a pretty good rookie year before slumping back last year in a sophomore slump. And then that center position is really the one that the Panthers, I will say, have not really solidified since Ryan Khalil retired. Second round pick, I believe, from Southern Cal back in the day. So now you with Damian Lewis, with Austin Corbett making the switch at center, and then Robert Hunt, as you mentioned, also at the other guard position. We'll see with Icky and Taylor Moton with the bookends how that goes for Bryce Young. But getting into Bryce Young a little more, as we mentioned here at the top, what does kind of year two success look like for him, in your opinion? Just what does Bryce need to do? And before I even finish my sentence, I've said this before to a lot of people who have come on this podcast, different guys who have written for the Panthers or who announced for the Panthers. CJ Stroud, we didn't face Anthony Richardson. We can't count that one. We lost to Will Levis. We beat CJ Stroud. Granted, it was one of his worst games of the year, but we still beat him. And at the end of the day, he's, Bryce, like you said, didn't really have a chance to succeed last year with the O-line play, with no one getting open outside of Adam Thielen and this all-star staff that on paper, it looked like, you put some really different ingredients in a blender, and sometimes those mix and they turn out pretty well, and sometimes it doesn't. And I think that's obviously what happened last year. So, boiling into my question, what does success look like for Bryce Young this year, in your opinion?
I think it's just playing freely, right? That's when he was at his best at Alabama.
Sure.
It was a quarterback who is not Johnny Manziel improvising. He wasn't this chicken with his head cut off, zigging and zagging and running all these different directions and chucking it up to Mike Evans, right? Like I fell for that in was it 2011, 2012? I mean, that was fun as hell. Johnny Manziel was electrifying. It wasn't that. Like when Bryce Young was at Alabama dominating defenses in the SEC, he moved with a purpose. He moved with instincts. It was like he had the sixth sense for where pressure was, how to evade it. He knew his body, he knew his limitations, and he knew he was athletic enough to kind of nimbly get in and out of spots and how to step up into the pocket, right? I mean, we have seen shorter quarterbacks excel in the NFL. Russell Wilson is Mr. Unlimited now. He's kind of a joke, the Subway commercials and everything that happened with Sean Payton. But let's remember, he was one of the best quarterbacks in the league for about a decade. And he was able to do it at a very small size. Now he's stronger, he's sturdier. The Bryce Young doesn't really have that kind of base, but I think that success for Bryce Young in year two is just being himself and not having to think too much. I think that's where Dave Canales will come in, and where having an experienced center, you mentioned Corbett, and just an offensive line. Maybe he doesn't have to set the protections every play. He did a lot last year as a rookie, and it sounds good, and it is good. He's so smart. It's like a curse in addition to being a blessing. Yeah, he can go up to the line of scrimmage and set all the protections and be in total command of the offense. But is he able to really be himself and play some backyard football and do his thing? Not really. So maybe Canales can take some of that off of maybe weapons. Hello, right? Xavier Legette, Deontay Johnson.
Yep.
It should help. It can only help. I mean, it can only go up from what they had last year. And you're in a weaker division comparatively to other divisions.
There are some people
they can turn this thing around.
Yeah, there are some people who have hopped on this podcast and said that they think the Panthers could be a wild card mix this year because of the division being so weak. And then some people, did not have that prediction. But like you said, a weaker division. Let's combine Deontay Johnson and Xavier Legette based on what you just said. Thoughts on Xavier Legette and the draft pick that he was in the first round? Technically, we did move up to 32 to do that. And then obviously the big trade for Deontay Johnson, who we were going to cut Dante Jackson anyway, the Panthers were, and they ended up still trading for Deontay Johnson. So I thought that was a steal for the Panthers from that perspective, getting someone out of Pittsburgh and being in a more better environment that he thinks he can thrive in. So, your thoughts on those two guys and how they can help Bryce Young?
I know it's hard. You mentioned Deontay Johnson and the play I can't get out of my head. I remember exactly where I was
I
when I
know what you're going
saw
to
it.
say. Go ahead.
Oh my God. I'm getting in a little Sunday run on the treadmill here in Western New York and they got Bengals, Steelers up. And you know what? The play that people forget, the play before, I want to say he dropped a touchdown,
I
right?
think you're
Like
right.
he's in the end zone and he has a really bad gaff there, and it carries into the next play where a teammate fumbles, the ball is there, and he just kind of gives up, right? I mean, that was about as bad as it gets from an effort standpoint. So there were moments like that out of Deontay Johnson. There's also moments where, that Steelers training camp a couple years ago, he makes plays that only a dozen receivers in the NFL can really make sometimes. I mean, he can make the acrobatic catch along the sideline that just makes your eyes pop out of your skull. So the talent is there, and really hasn't had the best quarterback play in Pittsburgh. Let's not forget that. He catches Ben Roethlisberger at the tail end. Mitchell Trubisky's the opening day starter. They go to Kenny Pickett. Man, I was all in on Pickett. Alas, it did not work out for Kenny Pickett last year in Pittsburgh. So, I mean, have we really even seen everything Deontay Johnson can do? I mean,
I don't think so.
numbers don't really show his talent. Like, I think that you could say that he's playing with the best quarterback he ever has. I mean, he caught Roethlisberger at the end. He was a shell of himself, but he's got a chance to finally be the receiver he always has wanted to be. And Thielen is still around in the slot. He can be dependable. He played really well last year. Thank God they had Adam Thielen. Imagine where the Panthers would be without him. It's kind of
Yeah.
scary to think. And then
Yeah.
Leggett, I just want to hear him talk. I just want to hear more press conferences because
That's
he's
true.
awesome.
But country boy from South Carolina doing all the good things for the Panthers. Um, what are we not talking about enough when it comes to the Panthers? And I know the national media is not going to talk about the Panthers. I get it, and that's another whole conversation. But is there something that whether it's fans of the Panthers, whether it is the national media, whether it's just the average person who may be just cheering on Bryce Young from the side, like what are we overlooking? What are we not talking about enough when it comes to Panthers next year?
It's crazy as it is. I feel like it's Bryce Young, and I don't know. I'm not there locally, so I'm sure that he is the topic locally all the time. But nationally, you turn on the TV, you listen to Sirius XM, all the various sports shows, and even hear it go along. I've only really kind of wrapped my head around him sporadically. He's kind of been a forgotten storyline. He was a number one overall pick in a draft with Anthony Richardson, CJ Stroud, Will Levis. Like there were quarterbacks, there were dudes in this draft, and he was talented enough to warrant a number one overall pick. So that alone should be like, okay, the expectations are enormous. And then you look at what Carolina gave up to get him. Like it's the story. It is one of the top storylines in the NFL. Like he's got to take a gigantic step here, and he can. And I think that they've created the infrastructure here to really give him a puncher's chance with Robert Hunt, like we said, with Deontay Johnson, with Leggett, with Adam Thielen moving in the slot. You know what? Jonathan Brooks, Texas running back. So we've got Bob McGinn at our website. He's done his epic draft series for 40 years now. He talks to scouts, to execs, to coaches around the NFL to really get the good, the bad, the ugly on all of these prospects. And
Yep.
everybody always loses their freaking minds because they don't like seeing mean things said about prospects. Well, guess what? Rashee Rice was the quote unquote scout's nightmare a year ago. Now we see why. Like a lot of times these scouts know what they're getting into with these guys. And Jonathan Brooks there was one scout 2 years ago who said he liked Brooks more than Bijan Robinson. I'm paraphrasing, but I'm pretty sure it was down those lines. Like there are people in the NFL who look at this back like, whoa, he is built for the NFL game. So the running back still matters. The running back is still important, especially with a Bryce Young. So my point is like he's got the infrastructure to really succeed here. And we're not talking about it enough. Now defensively, man, to not get Brian Burns done is a shame. I'd love to hear what you think about that. Like, I'm sure
I
there
was going
are
to be my next
financial
question.
ramifications there. He
Yeah.
is a legitimate top 5 edge rusher in this league, and you have him. He's in your building. I don't know how much he desired to re-sign with the Panthers. I'm sure at some point he probably did. And to just not get that done, not get ahead of that market is a shame. And they're going to miss him. And now you're kind of hoping that Jadeveon Clowney, off of a 9.5 sack season, mind you, with the Ravens, had a lot more talent around him in Baltimore than all in Carolina. Now you're kind of relying on him for pass rush. I don't know about that.
Yeah. DJ Wanham coming off quad surgery is the other guy that Panthers signed as well. And he was opposite Danielle Hunter in Minnesota. And he got the same amount of sacks as Brian Burns last year, which, again, not comparing him to Brian Burns, but he was not seeing those double teams like Danielle Hunter was. So if he can come back to a healthy self and kind of be that guy opposite Clowney, that could be a decent tandem for the
Yeah.
Panthers. Like you mentioned with Burns, it was one of those cases, now this is me not having inside of information on this. This is just me, on my opinion. I think I don't think Burns wanted to leave, but I also think he wanted a fair market value for himself. And it was reported that the Panthers offered him $27 million a year. He got 30 from the Giants. He ended up turning the 27 million down. We don't know if that was because of money. Was it something else? We don't know. But at the end of the day, the Panthers, I think, honestly, I think Dan Morgan and Dave Canales just kind of looked at it like saying, this is a clean slate, and we couldn't get it done, like you said, and it was unfortunate, but it was kind of like, let's cut our losses, let's get what we can for him, and kind of start in a new direction, a new era, if you will, because like you said, the previous regime, Scott Fitterer, Frank Reich, didn't get it done. Matt Rule before that,
Yeah.
um, they just couldn't get an extension done with him. And obviously, like you said, I personally, so a lot of Panther fans would probably agree with this statement. I don't think he's a top 5 defensive end. I don't think he's a Watt or a Garrett or a Bosa. I do think he can be paid. He's obviously being paid as a top like 7, 8 guy now, but I think he is a top 10, top 12 defensive end in the league for sure.
Five is probably a little much. Yeah.
I
When
don't
you
think he's
mentioned
a
those
Watt or a
guys,
Garrett or a Bosa, but I do think he's probably top 10 for sure. That's what I think with that.
and look, I get it. Like wanting to put your stamp on the franchise too. Like you come in, you've got the GM title, and I get it. Like wanting to really prioritize and value what you want to value, and there is something to be said. I mean, on wanting to just drive a franchise in a fresh direction, even with good players, you can kind of you know, I'm thinking of the Cincinnati Bengals, how they turned that whole thing around. When they came in, they had some pretty good players. Geno Atkins was a D tackle, like even Gio Bernard,
Yep.
Andy Dalton. They've always were kind of hovering around 500, but new regime came in, Zach Taylor, and it was like, okay, no, we've got to just move on from some of these players, get our own, spend the way we want to spend, and get to a different culture and a different place psychologically as a team. So I'm sure that probably played into it too for the Panthers.
Yeah. Before I let you kind of get into, I'm going to give you a kind of general free for all question to kind of answer however specific you would like to answer. One of the things I think is very underrated as well is Brant Tillis coming over from Kansas City, being the salary cap and vice president for the Panthers in that role. And I think he is someone who has done a great job with contracts and someone who I think is going to make a real difference in how the Panthers, like you kind of said, structure and re-sign their own guys and get their people in the building. I had Anish Shroff, voice of the Panthers, on earlier this offseason, and he specifically talked about alignment between Morgan, between Canales, between Tepper even. That is what's going to be key. Having the owner, having the GM, having the head coach all in alignment together is going to be the key for the Panthers moving forward without having those negative stories like you mentioned in the beginning and kind of that bad press, that bad PR. So we'll see.
Bringing
Obviously,
it on himself. Let's be real too. Like maybe he shouldn't do some of these things.
yeah. Well, and then just kind of put a bow on this. When they came in, when Canales and Morgan were officially named GM and head coach, they did sign Derek Brown to an extension, who is one of our homegrown players here in Charlotte. I would argue with Aaron Donald now retiring, he is probably top 3 defensive tackle in the league. I would say there's not very many better than him, with Aaron Donald out of the picture. And with Burns, with McCaffrey, with DJ Moore now gone, you've got Xavier Legette, you've got Jonathan Brooks, and you've got um, Clowney now in as replacements. Obviously, they're going to need a younger guy for Clowney down the road, but you've got 3 replacements for those 3 guys that you could argue were all cornerstone players for the Panthers. That, like you said, we traded them away, and what could have been with all
Yeah.
3 of those guys. I had John Middlecoff on him from the volume earlier this year, and
Oh, he's great.
he now he agreed with me, except with the McCaffrey, he was like, "Listen, like a lot of people in the league would have probably done the same thing that the Panthers had done in that situation. McCaffrey was, injured a lot, and the 49ers are giving you all these picks, essentially what equivalent to a first rounder for McCaffrey. And at that time, when he was injury prone and missed, I think, like 22 games or something. So it's like, I think a lot of teams would have done that same trade, if they were in the Panthers' shoes from that standpoint. But hindsight's always 2020, as they say now, with his thriving with the
Yeah.
49ers.
And John is a former NFL scout, so he'd have a much more substantive opinion on the matter than me. But I think that is a great point. Like, it's easy to look at it now and say, what in the hell were the Panthers thinking? And I get that take. You've got DJ Moore in-house. You've got Christian McCaffrey in-house. Identify talented players. Brian Burns, keep those talented players. Dan Morgan, he worked with Joe Shane here in Buffalo, and Joe Shane with the Giants early on. Like, that's kind of what he did, is like, didn't just, for better or worse, I'm not saying this is the best way to do it, he didn't just go in there and start getting everybody. I mean, they re-signed Daniel Jones, they re-signed Andrew Thomas, they kept some Saquon Barkley even stuck around for another year. Like, they did kind of identify some players that were around and saw it through. So I get that. But with Christian McCaffrey at that time, like where he was at in his career, the injuries, the value of the running back position was hotly debated. I got it. I understand. I mean, he's with Kyle Shanahan and the San Francisco 49ers and this team of monsters straight out of Space Jam with everything positionless dudes.
Yeah.
It's a unique situation.
Yeah. Let's get into now for our last little bit of time together, and we'll get some bold predictions after that and get you out of here. You mentioned before we started recording, you and I have been talking a little bit about a long form story that you were going to do on the Panthers this offseason. It obviously did not pan out, but just kind of give our listeners here and Panther Nation just kind of some things that you kind of observed and learned about the Panthers over the last maybe it was this offseason, maybe it was last few off seasons, and it can be about kind of whatever you want it to be. I'm going to kind of give you kind of free reign here. It can be positive, it can be negative, it can be somewhere down the middle, whatever you want to kind of talk about. But because the Panthers haven't made the playoffs since 2017, first round loss to the Saints. Super Bowl in 2015, so in the last decade at least, and that's pretty much the 2 Panthers kind of claim to fame, and then went through. This will be Dave Canales will be the 7th head coach in Panthers history if you don't count interim head coaches since 1995. So a lot of change in the last decade for the Panthers. Not a lot of wins, not a lot of success. So just kind of give us your kind of insights and what some of the things that you've kind of discovered, and I'll let you kind of take this wherever you want.
And I think I still want to work on this story, so hopefully it will come to fruition at some point.
Sure.
Up to the season or into the season. I think that the Bryce Young plan is fascinating. I do think the Panthers have a legitimate structure in place to get the most out of Bryce Young, between a head coach who is schematically smart, but I don't think Dave Canales is just this, brainiac in the laboratory working with potions. Like, I think he does see the bigger picture of running a team, and in a Mike McDaniel sense is going to get Bryce Young to really believe in himself. I think there's some really good coaching there that you're going to get. I mean, dude, this dude has been through a lot.
Yeah.
Man, I had no idea about his personal life. I don't know if you've gotten into that on this podcast,
I,
but holy
I have
hell.
not gotten into it, but I've seen. I have his book on order from the library. I'm going to read it soon once it
Yes.
gets in. So I know about the backstory of the book that he wrote. So yeah, I'm set to read it here, hopefully before the season.
I mean, and it is ballsy to put that out there, you know? I mean, that you he put that book out there at a time when it could have just nuked his career if NFL people read it. And
I personally
instead he
respect him more, to be quite honest.
yeah,
Like you put all your chips in the middle. You're vulnerable. This is what I am. I learned from my mistakes in my past, and I think it shows true marks of a man.
because I think he wants to genuinely help other marriages out there. I think it came from a good place. So I mean, anyways, he's been through a lot, and I think that he'll just be good for any quarterback, let alone a number one overall pick, a talent out of Alabama who won the Heisman Trophy. So I think kind of piecing together that plan from Canales to Dan Morgan, finding the pieces, manipulating roster through trades, through the draft. I think given their circumstance, we'll see how it plays out, but I don't know what else they could have done better than what they did. They probably exhausted every option they could at wide receiver. There weren't a lot of free agents on the open market, so they pulled a trade for Deontay Johnson. They draft Leggett out of South Carolina, who with Brandon Bean, an old friend from Buffalo. So I mean, he's somebody that could blossom. I mean, he came on like gangbusters that last year of college, and everything I was told talking to one scout was he just turned it on work ethic wise. He just took it to a different level. So he's somebody that you want in your building. It's impressive, So let's see what happens. The off season is a marathon. It's long. It's agonizingly long. I mean, I feel like I want a game to be played already, and now we got to wait
Yeah,
another month and a half just for training camp.
right.
But I think that the Panthers. I'm not just saying this because I'm on your podcast. Like, I don't think they're gonna be the playoffs. I'm not gonna go wild card like your previous guests, but I can see 7 wins. I could see 7-10, and real hope in Bryce Young playing freely. I think that's a successful year for the Panthers.
And I think a lot of the fans down here would take 7-10. That is almost quadruple the win total from last year and the hopeless 2023 season that was. And like you said, some stability for Bryce Young and kind of a huge progress step in the right direction. Yeah, so I mean that's my I'll have my season prediction as the season gets closer, but I don't think 7 wins is a bad place to be. And you mentioned it earlier, our division is a weaker division. You got Atlanta with some pieces, but Kirk Cousins is coming off the Achilles in New Orleans. Derek Carr is up and down. Their defense is pretty old. And Michael Thomas is gone. Alvin Kamara wants a new contract. He's another year older. And then in Tampa, you've got Mike Evans in his 30s now. Baker, can he have that same season again without Canales? Liam Cohen, who came over from the Rams, was there for a hot second when Baker was there. But he's a new coordinator and it's going to be a new scheme for them. So it is a wide open division, I think. I'm not sitting here saying the Panthers will win or I should win. That's not what I'm saying. I just think it's a wide open division. And if all the chips fell right, if they got a few breaks, if maybe a win or two here that they maybe didn't see coming, I think the Panthers could do well. And I think every Panther fans would agree with what I'm about to say. This is very cliche. I realize what I'm about to say, but Panthers as a team have been very, very willing to play up to their competition and then also play down to their competition. I think some teams do it better than others, but I think the Panthers seem to always every year play a game that they shouldn't have no business winning, and they get the upset. Maybe save 2023 season, but some of the other seasons, they always seem to get. I'll say it 4 years ago, first time they played Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City, they were a 65-yard field goal away from winning that game. Now, obviously, they didn't win, but the game was closer than anybody ever thought. With Teddy Bridgewater, I believe, was the quarterback at that time,
Wow, great pull.
and Matt Rule. So you just never know. And then the NFL stands for not for long, and it also stands for you just never know. Any given Sunday, as the saying goes. So,
Well, you know what?
um,
They almost beat Green Bay. I mean, that was almost a comeback for the ages, right? They
yep.
gave them a hell of a game in the fourth quarter.
Yep. You might have already said it, and so you can, if you want to repeat it, you can. But what is your boldest prediction for this 2020 Panthers team? I'm kind of doing the offseason question to end the pod. What is your bold prediction for this 2024 season for the
Mm.
Panthers?
Bold prediction for the Carolina Panthers. Let's say that Jonathan Brooks rushes for 1,000 yards. I hope that's bold enough.
I love it. That's very bold. I love it. If we can get a shadow of Christian McCaffrey, a former Panther, um, we will be in business. And Canales said in his press conference, he said we will be stubborn at running the ball. You will get tired of it very quickly. But he believes in running the football, like you
He
said, with
does.
that Deacon dunk and kind of play action game with Bryce Young as well. You got Rashad Penny, Jonathan Brooks, Miles Sanders, Chuba Hubbard. Those are the top four backs, if I'm not mistaken, right now with the Panthers. Will all of them make the roster? Probably not, but at least for now, that's who we got on the roster, and we'll see kind of what happens. Before I let you go, just wanted to give you the opportunity to plug Go Long, but before you do that, for anyone, I should have started this at the top. I'm a bad host for this. Kind of explain the intricacies of Go Long, how that kind of came about, what it is in its most simplest form for people who may not be familiar with it, and how's it going?
No doubt. Yeah. So I covered the Packers at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel for about 4 years. The Bills at the Buffalo News, then the whole NFL writing feature stories to have Bleacher Report for 4.5, 5 years. And then in November of 2020, I launched Go Long. It's at golongtd.com and part of the Substack network of newsletters. $8 a month, $50 a year, and really just trying to give readers a peek behind the curtain at how football really works, right? I feel like all this access and all this attention on the league, and we feel like we're closer than ever to the game when we really aren't. I feel like there's a lot of sanitized press conferences that people are writing off of, talking off of. Nothing raw. Very, very little raw. So I try to travel the country, sit down with players one-on-one, talk to scouts, talk to coaches, talk to GMs, really take people behind that curtain and bring them what they deserve, because fans are the ones pouring their hard-earned money into this game. They're the ones that make this multi-billion-dollar industry, let alone devoting all of their sanity toward this sport. So yeah, if you want long form, I mean, the stories are right. They'll be 6, 7, 8,000 words. And I'll mix in columns, mailbags, all that stuff too. But I got a Q&A up with Brandon Beane, the Buffalo Bills GM. Sat down with him last week. I have a story up in the Dallas Cowboys and what the hell Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones are up to, chatting with execs who have been at that draft table in those meetings. So that was really interesting, and have a lot of profiles planned. I just traveled the country, sitting down with a bunch of players. Not Charlotte, but I think just if you enjoy football, if you enjoy storytelling, you'll really enjoy Go Long. So hopefully that was a good sales pitch for everybody.
No,
I
no,
mean
that
it.
was
Mean every word.
yeah, no, that was good. Do you have a podcast or any place that people can follow you there, or want to listen to you more if they enjoyed here on Inside the Vault?
Definitely. Yep. Just the Go Long podcast. So Apple, Spotify, and our website, of course, YouTube. It's all there. It's kind of a mixture. So my co-host is Jim Monis. He was an NFL scout for the Philadelphia Eagles. He actually worked with John, I believe, a little bit. They might have crossed paths briefly on the New Orleans Saints. So he's there for the Breeze years. And then he was director of personnel for the Buffalo Bills before moving on from the NFL. And he just kind of does this with me for kicks, right? Kind of keeps him involved. And I think there's the value to Monis is he's out, so he ain't got nothing to hide. So he'll tell you stories that the NFL does not want him to tell. So he definitely keeps it real all the time on the pod. Bob McGinn, who I mentioned earlier, we do a podcast during the season. I did one with Brett Favre last year. We did about 8 episodes. So Favre always had a ton of stories. So you can kind of go back and listen to those as well. And we'll have a lot planned for this year that I'll announce eventually.
Well, that's a good place to end it. As I said at the top, my guest today for episode number 40 has been Ty Dunne of Go Long. Follow him, as he said, at Go Long TD. and those wonderful stories that he has. Go subscribe, as he said, $8. And Tyler, thanks for coming on Inside the Vault. We'll talk to you down the road, and best of luck as you continue to get that access for us fans across the entire NFL.
Hey, it was a pleasure, man. Definitely we'll be checking out of those Panthers soon. We'll make that Bryce Young story happen for everybody listening to this podcast. So thank you so much.
That sounds great. And that'll wrap up this episode of Inside the Vault. Please rate, review, or subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We will see you next time.